Right now, your next flight might be delayed by hours because of a fierce political battle over how immigration agents do their jobs.
Yeah, we're officially entering the second month of this massive partial shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah.
And, the real world chaos is just piling up fast.
It really is. Like, if you are flying out of major hubs today, you seriously need to brace yourself. We are seeing massive security delays cascading all across the country.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, over 300 Transportation Security Administration agents have just outright quit. We're talking wait times hitting up to 2 hours at Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta, and 90 to 100 minutes at Houston's George Bush Intercontinental.
The system is just buckling under the pressure. It can't handle it.
Right. But the wild part is that this whole airport nightmare is not actually about airport policy.
No, not at all.
It's the direct result of a total stalemate in Washington over border and immigration enforcement. It's a crisis that was sparked by a tragic shooting in Minneapolis.
Yeah, and to understand why this is happening, we are pulling from a really massive stack of sources today. We've got news reports, think tank fact sheets, internal government memos, and historical precedents.
And because this stems from highly charged political battles over immigration and ICE, we are looking at sources from across the entire political spectrum. So I need to share a quick, important note with you before we jump in.
Very important, yeah.
Today's sources contain highly charged political content from both the left and the right. We want to be crystal clear. We take no sides. We are simply here to impartially report what is in the source material and help you understand the facts and ideas at play without endorsing any political viewpoint.
Exactly. Our goal is just to map out the facts. You want to explain the extreme legislative tools both sides are currently wielding to get their way.
Right. So today, we are unpacking the mechanics of leverage. We're going to look at how lawmakers use blunt force tools like, withholding billions in funding and almost invisible procedural weapons like the Congressional Review Act.
And how those tools force major policy shifts that directly impact your daily life. Because, the current situation at the airports is basically a masterclass in how abstract political maneuvering creates immediate shockwaves.
It really is. The people feeling the strain right now aren't the lawmakers negotiating behind closed doors.
No, the strain falls entirely on the travelers sleeping on terminal floors. And obviously on the TSA officers themselves who are caught squarely in the middle of a fight they didn't start.
Yeah, I was reading through the statements from the American Federation of Government Employees Union, and the human toll here is just staggering.
It's awful.
These TSA officers are classified as essential workers. That means they are legally required to show up and man the security checkpoints. But because of the DHS shutdown, they aren't getting paychecks.
And you have to remember, the average salary for a TSA officer is only around $35,000 a year. They don't exactly have massive financial cushions to fall back on.
Right. $35,000 is not a lot of wiggle room.
Not at all. And combine that missing paycheck with the broader economic picture.
Yeah.
You see why the system is breaking down. Because of the ongoing war in Iran, global fuel costs are spiking sharply.
Oh, wow. Yeah. The gas prices.
Exactly. These officers are paying significantly more at the pump just to commute to a demanding high-stress job that, right now, isn't paying them a dime.
It makes complete sense why over 300 of them have simply walked away. They literally can't afford the gas to keep working for free.
You really can't blame them.
The union actually put out this blistering statement warning that the federal government is treating these officers as, quote, expendable. And the private sector is starting to panic, too.
Oh, yeah, the airlines are freaking out.
The CEOs of American, Delta, Southwest, and JetBlue sent a joint letter to Congress demanding they restore funding immediately. They're basically begging lawmakers to stop using air travel as a political football.
Because the airlines are bleeding money with all these delays, they just want the bleeding to stop. But the mechanics of a political shutdown make a quick fix incredibly difficult.
Well, I'm looking at these massive lines and thinking about the obvious solution. Like, if the fight in Congress is fundamentally about immigration and customs enforcement, about ICE and border policy, why not just carve out the TSA?
Right.
Pass a quick, clean bill to fund the airport security, get those people paid, make sure the flights take off, and then just go right back to fighting about immigration.
It sounds logical, right? And Democrats actually proposed doing exactly that. They drafted narrow bills designed to temporarily fund the non-integration agencies within the Department of Homeland Security, like the TSA and the Coast Guard.
Okay, so why didn't that happen?
Because Republicans actively blocked those attempts.
Yeah.
And their reasoning cuts to the very core of how political leverage works in a divided government.
Walk me through the logic of blocking a bill that would literally end the airport chaos.
Well, in a high-stakes negotiation, your power comes entirely from what you can withhold. Democrats are refusing to fund the entire DHS budget to force major sweeping reforms on ICE and Customs and Border Protection.
Okay, right.
The airport chaos is terrible, but politically, it creates massive public pressure on lawmakers to make a deal. If Democrats agree to fund the TSA separately, they relieve that pressure.
They take away the pain point.
Exactly. They take away the very pain point that is forcing Republicans to the negotiating table. Without the airport crisis, Democrats lose their biggest bargaining chip.
So the airports are essentially being held hostage to keep the pressure on the entire system.
Basically, yes.
Which means we really need to look at what Democrats are actually demanding. What is so critical that it's worth shutting down a massive federal department and upending the national travel grid?
To understand the sheer scale of the demands, you have to look at the catalyst that set this whole chain of events in motion. In January 2026, federal immigration agents fatally shot 2 U.S. citizens.
Renee Good and Alex Pretty.
Yes, on the streets of Minneapolis in 2 separate incidents.
Those were the killings that just dominated the news cycle, right? The ones Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer publicly condemned as state-sanctioned thuggery.
Yeah, that's the quote. The public outrage over those deaths fundamentally shifted the political landscape. Democrats just drew a hard line in the sand.
They're refusing to authorize a single dollar of DHS funding until their demands are met.
Right. And they aren't asking for minor administrative tweaks here. They want to completely overhaul the daily operations of immigration agents on the ground.
Yeah, looking at the actual list of demands in the sources, it's a massive operational shift.
It really is.
They want to ban agents from wearing face masks during operations. They want to mandate highly visible identification and require the use of body cameras. They also want to force ICE agents to follow the exact same use of force rules that govern local police departments, and they want to completely end what are known as roving patrols.
But as you read through the think tank fact sheets, the biggest sticking point, like the issue causing the entire system to gridlock, is this specific demand for judicial warrants.
Okay, so the warrant issue is the absolute core of this legal battle.
Completely. Currently, ICE agents rely heavily on administrative warrants to conduct their operations. Democrats are demanding a hard stop to that practice. They want to require agents to obtain judicial search warrants before they can enter homes or businesses.
I want to make sure I'm translating this legal jargon correctly. An administrative warrant is essentially signed by another DHS official.
Right.
So it's basically like having your own boss write you a permission slip to go search someone's house rather than having to convince an independent judge that you actually have a valid reason to be there.
That's a great analogy. That difference in oversight is the whole ballgame. A judicial warrant has to be signed by a federal judge.
And to get that, you need evidence.
Exactly. To get that signature, law enforcement must prove probable cause to a neutral third-party referee. This clash isn't just about paperwork. It's a fundamental fight over constitutional protections.
Specifically the Fourth Amendment.
Yeah, the Fourth Amendment, which guarantees the right of the people to be secure against unreasonable searches and seizures.
So let's play this out. If Democrats win this standoff, and ICE is forced to rely solely on judicial warrants, how does that actually restrict what an agent can do on, like, a random Tuesday afternoon?
Legally, without a judicial warrant, an immigration agent's access is severely limited. They can only enter public areas where anyone else could walk in, like a business lobby, a retail floor, or a parking lot.
Right, spaces open to the public.
Yeah. But to cross the threshold into a private area, like the employee break room of a factory or the inside of a family's living room, they either need that judicial warrant signed by a judge, or they need the person inside to give them explicit, voluntary consent to enter.
Okay, so they are trying to build a very strict legal wall around private spaces.
Exactly.
But while Democrats are pushing to heavily restrict where and how ICE
Imagine finding out
operates,
your
the
electric
Trump
bill
administration
is
has
secretly
been
funding
actively
the
moving
government's
policy
massive
dial in
spending
the exact
addiction.
opposite It is direction.
a pretty
which
shocking
sets up a
realization
when you
massive
actually
collision.
look at the math.
Yeah, the timing of these moves just imagine created for a perfect second storm. that you have a savings account. On
On
January 20, 2025, the Trump administration
you
officially
swore your
rescinded a
family hand over
Biden-era
heart
policy that
that this
established
money was
protections
strictly
for what
for
were known
fixing a
as
leaking
sensitive
roof.
locations. You
The
said,
sources define
"If we
sensitive
don't fix this
locations
roof,
as places like
the house is
schools,
gonna
hospitals,
It's an
places
existential
of
crisis
worship,
for the
and even
house.
disaster
Exactly, it's the Save the
evacuation
House
routes.
Fund.
Right.
But then,
The previous
your car breaks
policy
down,
essentially
you spend a little
told
too much on
immigration
groceries,
enforcement
you've
to
got bills
treat those
piling up.
areas as off
So what do you do?
limits.
And the logic behind the Biden policy was to create a safety buffer.
Pay off your credit cards,
The
and tell
government
your
wanted
family,
to
hey,
ensure
don't
that
worry, we'll fix the
undocumented
roof
individuals
later.
wouldn't be too
And in
afraid
this
of
scenario,
deportation
the
to
roof
seek
is the
emergency
planet,
medical care,
or at least
send
Maryland's
their kids to
climate
school,
goals.
or
And the
evacuate
car is
during
a
a
massive
hurricane.
That makes
Self-inflicted
sense from a public safety standpoint.
$1.5
It does,
billion
but the Trump administration
state
argued
budget deficit.
those
A
buffers
completely
hindered
avoidable
lawful
deficit, I
enforcement.
might add.
Welcome
So they
to the deep
rescinded
dive.
the policy.
Today
and on
we're
January
exploring a
31st,
classic case of
2025,
fiscal sleight of hand
ICE
coming
issued
out of
a new memo
Minneapolis.
outlining
We
the
are looking at
replacement
the
rules.
strategic
And looking
energy
at that memo,
investment
the
fund.
new safeguards are minimal
SAFE.
compared to the old policy.
It's a huge pot
Under
of
the
money
new rules,
meant to
ICE
save the
officials can
environment.
simply give
But it's turning
verbal
into a hidden
authorization to their
tax
agents
on every
to enter
single
these
person
formerly
paying an
protected
electric
areas.
bill
Yeah,
in
just a
Maryland.
verbal, okay.
It really
the only
is. It's become the center of
restriction I
a
see is a
huge
requirement
political
to
fight.
consult with
You've
ICE
got a
legal
Democratic
counsel
governor,
before taking
frustrated
enforcement action
environmentalists
at
making
public
some very
demonstrations
awkward
or rallies.
compromises,
And
and
advocacy
conservative
groups
critics who are rightly
immediately
calling this
sounded
whole
the
thing a
alarm
shell
over that
game.
memo.
A shell game.
The National
when you look
Immigration
at the
Law
documents
Center
we have
published a
today,
detailed
the
fact
force,
sheet warning
budget
that
proposals,
removing
critiques
these
from Senate
protections
Republicans
creates a
it is
severe
really hard to unsee it.
nationwide
Our mission
chilling
for this
effect.
deep dive
Because
is
people are
simple.
scared.
Follow the money.
Exactly.
Always
Yeah.
follow
Their
the money.
argument
We are
is
going
that
to
if a
see
portion
how
of the
a fund
population is
designed to
terrified to
fight
go to the
climate
emergency
change
room
is being
or
used to
attend a
plug holes
parent-teacher
in the state
conference,
budget.
it degrades
And we'll dig into
public
the
health and
argument that
safety
this isn't
for the
found money at
entire
all.
community,
This is essentially a
regardless of
backdoor
anyone's
tax on
immigration
families.
status.
Which brings
Let's
us
get
right
right
back
into
to
it.
the current
The
standoff
Strategic
at the
Energy
negotiating
Investment
table.
Fund. It sounds
Right.
very
The White House
official,
recently
very
floated
important.
a counteroffer
What does it
to try
actually
and
do?
thaw the
Well,
freeze.
on
They
paper,
proposed
it is
restoring
restoring
some enforcement
green
limits
piggy bank.
specifically around
The SIF
hospitals
is managed
and
by
schools,
the
and
Maryland
they
Energy
agreed to
Administration.
expand the
Its whole
rollout of
stated
body
purpose
cameras
is
for
to
agents.
reduce energy
And
bills,
there was a major
cut
headline
waste,
out of a
and
recent
fund
Senate
renewable
confirmation hearing,
energy.
too.
Like solar panels
Senator
and efficiency
Markwayne
upgrades.
Mullen,
Exactly.
the nominee for
But here
DHS
is the real
secretary,
aha moment of this
publicly
story.
pledged that under his leadership,
Where does the money
the agency
actually
would revert
come
to
from?
requiring those
Because they
judicial
aren't just
warrants we talked about
taxing you
earlier.
directly
And
for it.
honestly, offering
and
to
that's why
concede on the
politicians
judicial
absolutely
warrant
love it. It
issue
feels free.
is a
So about
massive
40%
olive
comes from
branch
regional
from the
carbon
administration.
auctions.
It seems
But
like
the
a
big chunk,
huge
the one
deal.
growing like
It
crazy,
is,
comes
but
from
it hasn't
something
been
called
enough
alternative
to break the
compliance
payments.
payments, or
Democratic
ACPs,
lawmakers,
Which is just a fancy
with
government
Senator
term for
Richard
a fine.
Blumenthal
Right.
acting as
It's
the
a
fine
vocal
representative
representative.
of the
Let me
bloc,
break it down.
have flatly
Maryland law
stated the
forces
offer is
utility
insufficient.
companies
They
to
want the
buy
whole
a certain
package.
amount
Yeah.
of green
They're
energy.
demanding
They
that
have
every
proved they're
single
using
item on the
renewables.
reform list
But if
is
they
met
can't find that green
before they will
energy,
cast
or
a
if it's
vote
just
to
way too
reopen the
expensive on the
Department
market.
of Homeland
which it
Security.
usually
And on
is.
the other side,
Yeah, the state gives them an
Republicans
escape
like
hatch.
Senator John
The
Thune
utility
are
can just pay a
publicly
fee
accusing
directly to the
Democrats of
state
holding the
instead.
economy
That fee
hostage.
is the ACP.
They're claiming Democrats are
And here's
dragging
the
out the
kicker.
shutdown and intentionally
Utilities are
prolonging the airport
increasingly
chaos
just paying the
purely to
fines
score
because it's
political
cheaper than
points
actually
with their base.
buying the
So,
green energy.
You know, the
Wait,
DHS
so
shutdown
the
is this
climate
highly
fund is getting
visible
incredibly
blunt force
rich.
weapon. Everyone
Precisely
sees the
because
massive lines in
the green
Atlanta.
energy mandates
Everyone
are failing.
understands the pain of
Precisely.
delayed
It is a
flights.
completely
You can't ignore it.
perverse incentive.
But while the
The
public is
government
staring
made
at
the
the
mandates
TSA
so
checkpoints,
aggressive and the market is so
lawmakers in
distorted
Washington
that
are
power
utilizing
companies
a
are
much
just writing checks to the
quieter,
state instead
almost
of going green.
invisible
And the
weapon
stats on this
to
are just
permanently
staggering.
rewrite the
They
rules
are.
of the country.
In
You were talking about the
2022,
Congressional
this
Review
revenue
Act
was
or the CRA.
$77 million.
Yes.
I have to
By
admit, when I first saw
2025,
this in
it
the
jumped to
outline, it sounded like an obscure
$365
piece of
million.
procedural
Wow.
trivia.
From
But the
77
sources show
million
it is
to
quietly tearing up the
365 million in
entire
3 years.
legislative
Right, so now the
rulebook.
state has this
What exactly is
massive
the CRA?
accidental
So the
pot
Congressional
of
Review
gold.
Act
It's
is a law
supposedly
passed
for
in
green
1996.
But remember,
And
that
it was
money didn't
originally
just fall out
designed
of
as
the
an
sky.
emergency
The
break
utility
for
companies
Congress.
paid
Okay.
those fines.
When a
And do
federal
you think
agency
those
like,
massive
say, the
corporations just
EPA or the
eat that
Department of
cost out of the
Energy
goodness of their heart?
issues a new
Oh,
regulation,
absolutely not. They
the
pass
CRA
every
gives
single penny
Congress
of that
a
onto the
60-day
customer.
window to
Exactly.
review
It shows up right on your
If Congress
electric bill.
decides
So
they
you,
don't like the new
the everyday
rule,
ratepayer,
they can pass a
are
joint
paying
resolution
for the
of disapproval
utility's
to strike it
failure
down
to meet a
completely.
government
But
mandate.
hold on, the Senate
The state
has the
collects your money,
filibuster.
Right.
drops
Usually
it
it
in the
takes
safe,
60
and
votes
says,
to pass
look at all this
anything
cash we have for the
controversial, which
climate.
means
Which brings
most
us to
things
the
just
rate.
die in gridlock.
Because that money is
Does the
definitely
CRA
not staying in
resolution
the
somehow
climate fund.
bypass
Not
that 60
anymore.
vote Enter Governor Wes
It
Moore.
bypasses it entirely,
His administration
and that is the true
is staring
source of
down
its
a
power.
projected
A CRA
$1.5
resolution
billion
only requires
budget
a simple
deficit.
majority vote. It
1.5
physically
billion.
cannot be filibustered.
You can't
in the
just
Senate.
ignore
Wait,
a hole
really?
that deep.
Yeah.
You can't.
If you have 51
And when government
votes,
overspends
you
to
can
that
kill a
degree,
federal
they
regulation.
start checking
Okay, that
under
is
the
a
couch
massive
cushions for
loophole.
loose change.
But the sources say
Except
it goes
here,
even
the
further
couch
than just
cushion is
repealing
the
a
green
rule.
energy
Oh, it
fund,
does.
and
The CRA
loose
contains a
change is
highly
hundreds of
controversial
millions of taxpayer
salting the
dollars.
earth clause.
So what's the actual proposal?
It states that if a rule is
The
repealed using
governor's
this
plan
method,
diverts
the agency is legally
$292
prohibited from
million
ever reissuing a new
directly from
rule
the SID
in,
into
quote,
the state's general
substantially
fund.
the same
just to
form.
balance the books.
Whoa.
Just to
The
cover
only
their
way an
overspending.
agency can touch that issue
They
again is
are
if Congress
using
passes
energy
a brand new
fines
law
to pay for
explicitly
general
giving them
government
permission to
operations. restrictions.
so.
So it's not just a
Bureaucracy,
veto,
salaries,
it's a permanent
office
eraser.
supplies, you name
Yes.
it.
But that's
it
not
reminds
even
me
all
of
of it.
finding
Yeah.
a
I read in
legal
the
way
sources
to
there's
delete
also a
someone else's
rebate
save
scheme.
file
Yes,
in a video game.
this is the part
You don't
critics
just stop
are calling
their
a
progress,
political
you sweetener.
sweetener to start the
They're
entire
grabbing
game
another
over from scratch,
$100
assuming they can even
million
find the
out of
console
the
again.
fund to give a
That's pretty accurate.
one-time
And the
$40
phrase,
rebate to eligible
substantially the
households.
same form,
$40.
terrifies
Earbucks.
federal
So let me
agencies
get this straight.
because
The state
legal
mandates
definition
drive
is
up energy
incredibly
costs.
vague.
I can
The
imagine.
utility
EPA
companies
spends
pass those
3
massive
years
costs
gathering
to you and
scientific
me.
data and public
Our bills
comments to
go up
craft
by
an emissions
hundreds of
rule.
dollars a year,
And Congress kills it
and
with
then
a
the
simple
governor
majority
takes a
vote
chunk
in
of
an
our own
afternoon.
money,
The
hands us
EPA
back a
might
crisp
be
$40
too afraid of
bill,
lawsuits
and
to ever
basically
try
says,
regulating
"You're
those
welcome."
emissions again.
That is the
But if
exact
this tool is so
math.
powerful,
It's wild.
why
And if you look
hasn't
at the recent
Congress been
supplemental
using it every
budget,
single
they're
day
cutting
since
or shifting another
1996?
$80 million.
Because
When you add all
historically,
this
there
up,
was a
this
strict
raid depletes the
independent
fund by
gatekeeper controlling the
82%,
weapon.
82% of the fund
Congress
wiped out.
designated
Wiped
the
out.
government
leaving only about
Accountability Office, the
$164
GAO,
million for the
to act as
actual
the
green
official
initiatives
referee.
it was legally
Okay.
meant for.
When an agency
That is not
issued
a
a
memo.
memo, granted
That's
a
a
waiver,
total
or published a
gutting.
guideline,
And this is
the
where the
GAO
politics
had to
gets
formally
super
decide
interesting.
if that
Because
action
you would
legally
assume the
qualified as a rule.
environmentalist
Because if the
groups like
GAO says,
Sierra
no, this
Club
is just a
or the
routine
Chesapeake
waiver, not
Climate
a
Action
formal
Network,
rule, then
you'd
Congress
assume they'd
isn't
be
allowed to use the
furious.
CRA
They were
fast-track process
initially
to kill it.
when this
Precisely.
first leaked. They called it
You need an
unacceptable.
independent
They
referee
said it
to
was a
define the
huge
boundaries of the
mistake
game.
to
Otherwise,
use
the
this
players
money
will just
as a
abuse the
petty
system.
cash drawer.
But in
But then they
2025,
folded.
the
They
Senate
completely
decided they
folded.
didn't want to
Now
referee
they are
anymore.
actually supporting
Walk me
parts
through
of the
what happened
governor's
in
spending
2025,
plan,
because this seems
Talk
like the
about
pivot
strange
point where the whole
bedfellows.
system changed.
Why on earth
Right.
would they do
So
that?
the Trump
If they truly
administration's
believe climate
Environmental
change is an
Protection
existential
Agency
crisis,
submitted
why
3
let the
Clean
state
Air Act
raid the
waivers to
survival
Congress.
fund?
It's just raw political
Following standard
calculation.
procedure,
They know
the
voters are
GAO
getting crushed by
evaluated the
inflation and
waivers
high
and
energy
ruled
bills
that they
right
did
now.
not meet
If
the legal
these green
definition
groups
of
attack
rules.
a $40 rebate,
The Senate
even if it's a
parliamentarian
total
agreed
gimmick,
with the GAO,
they look like they don't
officially
care about
stating
working
that these
families.
waivers did
So they
not
have to play the
qualify
game.
for
They are
expedited,
swallowing a very bitter
filibuster-free
pill.
consideration
In
under
exchange
the
for letting
CRA.
the
And
governor
under the old
raid
system
the
we just
fund
talked about,
today,
the process
they are
stops right
lobbying
there.
for a
The
new
referee
law
made a
to
call.
create a
But
funding
Senate
floor
Majority
in the
Leader
future.
John
Meaning
Thune
what
challenged
exactly?
the call.
Meaning they want to
raised a
guarantee
point of order
that
on
the
the
state
Senate
will
floor.
mandate
He essentially argued that the GAO's
$365
opinion
million
didn't matter.
a
Wait,
year
what?
Yeah.
on climate spending.
Thune stated that if an
So they are
executive
throwing
agency
today's
submits an action to
taxpayers under
Congress
the
and
bus
calls it a
to
rule,
lock in a
then
permanent
Congress
claim
should
on your wallet
automatically
later.
grant it
That's
the
the
expedited
gamble.
CRA
And it brings
procedures,
us right to the
completely
core
bypassing the
conservative
independent
critique.
referee.
He just
People
ignored
like
the
Senate
GAO
Minority
and
Leader
forced
Steve
to vote on
Hershey
his own
aren't
interpretation.
buying this
He put it to
spin
a
at
vote,
all.
and the
Not
Senate
for a second.
voted
Let's walk
51
through
to
their argument,
46
because it
to
really
sustain his
exposes
point
the
of
math
order.
here.
Yeah.
By
They
winning
call it
that
the
vote,
hidden
they didn't
tax.
just move
Right.
those
Let's
specific
be rigorous
EPA
about
waivers
this logic.
forward. They
Step
established
one,
a
the state
brand new
forces a green
binding
mandate that
precedent.
is totally
Wow.
disconnected
The
from
GAO
economic
no longer
reality.
has the final
Step two,
say.
the
If an
utilities
agency
can't meet it,
submits an
so they
action
pay
as
the
a
massive
rule,
fine.
Congress
Step
can
three,
fast-track its
utilities
destruction.
raise
I
your
need to make
electric
sure I'm
rates to
grasping
cover
the
the
scale
fine.
of
And
this.
step 4,
By
the
simply
state grabs
holding a
that fine
procedural
money to
vote
pay
to
for
change the
general
definition
government
of who
bloat.
gets to
Exactly.
classify a
So,
rule,
in effect,
they
the
essentially
state is
unlock
taxing
a
electricity
fast-track cheat
users to
code.
pay
Pretty
for the
much.
DMV
A cheat
or
code to
state
bypass
salaries
the 60-vote
without
gridlock
ever
in the
having to
Senate for
publicly
almost
vote on a
anything an
tax
agency
hike.
does.
Hershey says
You are
Maryland
grasping
families
the
are being
scale
double
perfectly.
billed.
You pay your
Democrats
regular income
immediately
taxes,
accuse
and then you
Republicans
pay
of
this
deploying a
massive
nuclear
surcharge on
option
your
to
electric
destroy the
bill.
legislative
It's
guardrails.
incredibly sneaky.
It's politically
Republicans
convenient.
completely
Yeah.
denied
And
that
there's a second layer
characterization,
to this criticism,
arguing they were
the
simply
sheer
reclaiming
hypocrisy of it all.
constitutional
this is
oversight
the
from unelected
most
bureaucrats.
glaring
Right.
part.
But regardless of the
Politicians
political
constantly tell us
framing,
climate
the
change is an
reality of the
existential
mechanism is
threat.
undeniable.
They say the world is burning.
That single
Mm-hmm.
51 to
Code red
46
for
vote
humanity.
completely
We have
altered the balance
zero
of power in
time to
Washington.
waste.
Yeah. So
It
critics are
transformed the
asking a very
CRA
simple,
from a
very
rarely
devastating
used
question.
oversight tool
If this is
into
the
a
most urgent
devastatingly
crisis in
effective
human
offensive
history,
weapon
why
against
is the
the
climate
executive
fund
branch.
the
And
very
looking at the
first thing
timeline
you
of
raid
2025
when
and
you
the sources,
overspend your budget?
they
You
didn't
don't
let that
raid
weapon
your
sit on the
life-saving
shelf.
surgery fund
Not
to
for
pay
a
off your
second.
credit
card.
Armed with this
Exactly.
new
The
precedent
critics
and
argue
unified
this
control of the
proves the whole
government,
climate panic
Republicans
is just rhetoric.
aggressively rolled back
When push comes to
regulations
shove,
throughout the entire
keeping the
year.
government
Wow.
bureaucracy
The
fully
pace was
funded
unprecedented.
is way more
President Trump
important to
signed
them
numerous
than the
CRA
green projects
resolutions
they
into
claim
law,
are vital for our
systematically
They
overturning
treat the
rules
fund
from the
like a
EPA,
slush
the
fund,
IRS, the
and it
Department of
entirely
Energy, and the
undermines their
Bureau of
moral
Land
authority.
Management.
It's just
If the
wild.
money isn't sacred,
They
then the
dismantled
crisis
years
clearly
of
isn't as
complex
urgent as they claim on
regulations
cable news.
using
Let's
simple
talk about the
majority votes,
real-world consequences
fundamentally
of this.
reshaping the
Because
nation's
while
environmental
politicians
and
are
financial
moving hundreds of
landscape
millions around
in a
on
matter of
spreadsheets,
months.
It's incredible to
affects
think
the
about.
actual
We spend
grid.
so much time
What gets
arguing
left
over the
behind when you
grand
drain
text of massive
82% of
bills,
the fund?
but
Well,
the real
programs
power
for
to
electric
reshape
heat
the
pumps for
country
low-income
was
households
unlocked by
get
a
slashed.
dry procedural
And a
vote
heat
on a
pump actually
point of
lowers a
order
bill
regarding
for
a definition.
It
15 to
highlights
20
a
years.
fundamental
Right.
truth about how the
Instead,
government
they're
actually functions.
sacrificing long-term
The
infrastructure
power doesn't
for a
just lie in the
$40
text of the
political
laws
handout
themselves.
that might cover
The
your
real
groceries
power
for
lies
2
in
days.
mastering the
They're also
complex
cutting
hidden
electric school
rules of
buses,
how those laws
induction
are passed,
stoves, solar
delayed,
projects.
or
But here's the
permanently
ultimate
erased.
reality check.
Let's bring all of this
Even
together,
before this
because
rate,
it is
with all this
incredibly
massive
easy to
spending,
get
was
lost in the
Maryland
weeds of
actually
administrative
hitting its
warrants, Senate
climate targets?
parliamentarians,
No.
and point of order.
Yes.
Not even close.
But
The
what
Climate
this deep
Solutions
dive
Now Act
shows
demands a
is how these
60% emissions
abstract
reduction by
legislative
2031.
maneuvers eventually
60%,
land
that's a
squarely
squarely in your
target.
lap.
It's huge.
Whether
But a
you are
University
stuck
of Maryland
sitting on your
analysis
suitcase
shows
for
that
2
under
hours
current
in a
policies,
massive
the
security
state is
line
only
in
gonna hit
Atlanta
40
because
to
lawmakers are using a
45%.
funding
They are
shutdown
miles
as a giant
behind.
lever.
So we are missing
Or
the
you are
targets. The
breathing
grid
air
is getting more
affected by
expensive.
EPA
And
regulations
now,
that were
the money
fast-tracked
intended
into the
to
garbage
fix it
bin
is
using
being
a
flushed
procedural
into the
cheat
general
code.
fund
Exactly.
to cover a
These
deficit.
maneuvers
It
have
is a cascade of
profound,
failure.
immediate
The administration
impacts on your
says they
daily
can
life.
walk and chew gum at the
Proves
same
that the
time, meaning
invisible plumbing
balance the
of
budget
Washington,
and save the
the
planet.
actual process of
But
lawmaking,
you can't
is
drain
just
the
as
fuel
important
tank
as
and
the
expect
laws
the car to
themselves.
cross the finish
When you
line.
take the time to
And think
understand
about
the
grid
tools of
stability.
leverage, the
When you
chaos
force these
stops looking like an
transitions
accident.
faster than
The
technology
2-hour
allows,
wait at the
and you
airport isn't a
penalize
failure of logistics.
reliable energy
It is
sources,
a highly
costs
calculated,
explode,
intentional
and the grid
strategy
gets fragile.
designed to
That's
inflict
exactly why those
maximum
fines are so
political
high.
pain.
Which
Reliable
leaves us with
green
a final
energy
thought
just
to
isn't
chew on as we
available
wrap
at the
up.
scale the law
What
demands.
happens to a functioning
So the state is
democracy when the
literally
emergency
penalizing
breaks
the
of
grid
government
for the
like
laws of
withholding
physics and
billions of
economics?
dollars in
And
essential
instead of
funding,
fixing the
or
bad
fast-tracking
policy,
the
instead of
permanent
admitting
repeal
the
of complex
mandates are
regulations,
unrealistic,
stop
the
being
government
rare
just
oversight
treats the
tools
fines
and
as
instead
a new
become the
revenue stream.
everyday weapons
Which
of
brings
choice.
us back to the most
Does the
disturbing part
system
of this whole
eventually
deep dive,
break
the
under the
perverse
constant strain
incentive.
of these
Let's really
extremes,
drill
or
down
is
on
this
this.
just the new
The state of
normal
Maryland has a
American politics?
$1.5
It
billion
is definitely something to
deficit.
think
They're
about the next
desperate
time
for
you are
cash.
staring at
Right.
an airport
And the
departure
Green
board,
Fund is
realizing
flush
your
with
flight was
cash
delayed by
specifically
hours
because
of a fierce
utilities are
political
failing
battle
to meet the
happening
green goals.
1,000
So if
miles
the
away.
utilities